Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to EIG's 42nd webinar, Unleashing Online Project Derisking to Drive Speed for Your Large-Scale Projects with the AIM Institute's demo Minesweeper, resulting in lower execution times and costs. This is the third in a series of webinars on derisking. Minesweeper de-risks your large-scale project, saves you time and money to meet your deadlines. Implementing projects in a streamlined manner is one of the greatest challenges for companies today. With a company's limited resources, speed to implementation, while not negatively affecting the current workflow process, has always been a challenge for large-scale projects, such as new product introduction, what we love, research and development, manufacturing operations restructuring, supply chain network optimization, capital-intensive projects, cross-functional projects, IT infrastructure projects, consolidation, and restructuring. Our goal today is to provide you the digital tools to increase visibility of risks so that you become more proactive to identify, assess, mitigate, and manage risks, and have collaborative visibility of these risks is the first step to being faster than your nearest competitor. Please have your cell phone handy and open up another window in your browser and log in to Poll Everywhere website at pollev.com/Jim DeVries 073. It's also in the chat window. So I want to thank you all for taking this time to attend Enhanced International Group's series of webinars on building a resilient enterprise. We really appreciate you taking the time today, especially in light of the coronavirus pandemic that doesn't seem to be fading. We're in our fourth wave. Hopefully this wave will end safe and your family will stay healthy and safe. Again, my name is Jim DeVries, founder of Enhanced International Group. EIG is a platform of 40 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by leveraging EIG's partners' tenured experience like Dan. Our goal is to provide collective collaborative expertise to help enable your organizations to deliver self-sustaining, positive margin growth. The competitive advantage focusing on 90-day action plans. We thrive on delivering 1 + 1 + 1 = infinity. We hope that you find this information useful for you and your teams. We welcome your questions and comments to support you in your efforts. Please have your cell phone handy and open up another window in your browser to join in the polling at pollev.com/Jim DeVries 073. Since March of 2020, we've been having quite a number of webinars covering areas like people, process, data, and technology. We've had fireside chats, and we'll have a fireside chat actually coming up here tomorrow on artificial intelligence. In October, we'll resume our series on new product introduction, speed to resiliency, and looking at simulation and design for X. We'll also be looking at a webinar in October on the digital twins, another one on the demos to give you a better idea of what a digital twin is. And this is a real live demo with a real client. We also have our 90-day action plans, the supply chain risk management consortium series. It's also coming up. We are fortunate enough today to have with us Dan Adams. Dan is an author of New Product Blueprinting, the Handbook of B2B Organic Growth. Dan is the recipient of numerous patents and innovation awards, including a listing in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Dan has 29, maybe 30 years of Fortune 500 years experience of marketing, product development, strategic planning, business development, and leaderships. I love Dan's philosophy of understanding the inside experience before launching new product introduction or blueprinting. And Dan has launched the AIM Institute in 2005. Dan, a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Really glad to be here. As you mentioned, the AIM Institute, we really focus on market-facing innovation for B2B companies. We just work with companies that sell to other companies. We're basically a training firm. And as you mentioned, Jim, our flagship product is the new product blueprinting training people how to do voice of customer, B2B. But we found a few years ago that when a client was doing a really large transformational project going into an unfamiliar market, they needed some more tools. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we began developing this Minesweeper approach. And it's been quite successful. We've done it all around the world, quite a few different companies. And up until recently, it's only been for market-facing innovation, a new R&D project, new technology, new market. But you and I are exploring ways of getting it into other areas. We've had a couple clients do it for things like plant consolidations, and the approach works. So it's a little bit new for us, but today we're going to share how that might be applied outside of market-facing innovation to other sorts of high-risk projects. So glad to be here for that.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll echo Dan's thoughts. I've used this basic approach for other projects, and everything from building a power plant and de-risking it to rolling out new products. So it's a great approach that Dan has solidified here and making it very easy and bringing everybody up to speed on the same level. So very excited about sharing that with you. Again, just a recap here. This is the third webinar in the series of webinars, and our last one on de-risking. We're going to move over to new product introduction with our next webinars in November, and then followed up with a VOC in December. For today, very simple agenda, and we look forward to making this fun and engaging as possible. So lots of questions, and your feedback is kind of needed here to make it really even more fun. We'll kick it off with why take on risk, a little background. Second, we'll review the material of our first and second webinars, which is available on the Consulting EIG and AIM websites. And then third, Dan will take us through the de-risking case study applied to large-scale projects. And then fourth, we'll open it up to the participation demo, where we'll roll up our sleeves and see what's under the hood of Minesweeper online software. So this is going to be a very fun and interactive webinar. So we look forward to your participation. And please enter anything, questions you have in the Q&A dialogue boxes, the chat, whatever is most convenient for you. So before we kick off, we just kind of want to sit back and look at the greater landscape. We're on our fourth wave. Delta, Lambda, Mu doesn't seem to be running out of gas here. And companies are, having to redefine themselves in the new product development and supply chain, and everything is being disrupted, every part of the organization because of the pandemic. And then there's all these cyber risk and all these other things going on. This is reference to the supply chain risk management consortiums look at it, but at the end of the day, it affects us all, these risk events. And we're not talking about supply chain risk management today. We're talking about how do you survive and thrive in executing these projects. And everybody wants to retool, regroup their organizations. So the question is, how are you going to do that? Well, that's going to take some large scale projects that will involve risk. This tool, the Minesweeper, is the perfect tool for every organization that's out there because everybody's restructuring in some way or fashion to meet this new demand. So with the first poll we have here, we have a question as how often does your company have risk-based discussions? Do you have it on an annual basis, the typical quarterly basis? Do you review it on when you have an event? Do you do it proactively ahead of projects and events, or is it embedded in the way you do work today? So if you would respond to that question, that would be wonderful. Get your feedback, and then maybe Dan, you can provide some comments of what you've seen out there recently with your clients.
Yeah, so what I've seen is they do have these risk discussions, but it's generally on a project by project basis. And they, kind of basically it's when the need is there. But the problem that I see is it's not early enough. It's there's a lot that can be discussed very early on in terms of laying out all the assumptions at the very onset, and then talking about driving those from uncertainty to certainty. That is very rarely happening. It's usually kind of late in the game where they're assessing probabilities of success, net present values, and that sort of thing. So that's what I see on this thing, and usually project by project.
Project by project.
Yeah.
So, Mark, you're on. I think I gave you the microphone, so I'll put you on the spot if you're willing to chime in. I know you're working with some clients right now.
Yeah, I think the closest to what I'm used to these days is the proactively on some projects, and some projects is definitely part of it, and weekly is probably too frequently for what it's actually happening. I would say it's it's not past events, and so it's not C, but it is proactive, but it's still only on a few of the projects.
Okay, great. So it's between C and D is what you're saying.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
It's a tweener. All right, great. Thanks, Mark. All right, great feedback. And with that, I think we're gonna move to the next slide here, and Dan will kick us off here. Dan?
Then is they think in terms of the Ansoff risk matrix. So if you click a couple times, if it's down in the familiar markets, we don't do great, but we really struggle when we get into the unfamiliar markets. That's where the success rate goes way down. And so if you click again, when you consider some past projects, we could ask, what about landmines? And I think that's maybe the next slide that comes up here. You can go, yeah. So most projects, when you interview teams that have had past projects that failed, they will agree on what the landmine was that blew up the project or schedule or budget, whatever it may be. And then if you ask them, could they have detected these beforehand? Then the usual answer is, yeah, we really should have. We could have, and we should have. So that's what we're going to do is think about how we can see these landmines early. So you can click that again. And when you do that, there's a number of landmine principles that we're going to be able to employ. So on the next one, if you see this, you click through a few of these here. Nobody steps on a landmine they can see, right? So if we can see it, maybe we can avoid it. We know there's more dangerous landmines in this unfamiliar terrain. So when we're doing something we haven't done over and over again, it becomes a bigger concern. But the sooner we spot the landmine, the greater our options. So, instead of just getting right to the landmine going, oh, what do we do? If we see it off in the distance, we have room to get around it. And that's why, risky projects become late projects. People get moving along, all of a sudden they see the landmine, they stop, and they get steam up again, they see another landmine. So if we see it ahead of time, it's going to help us a lot. So what we'll talk about is how we spot these landmines in transformational projects. But the concept that's really going to be central to what we cover here is this. Uncertainty and risk are two different beasts. Let's just take a look at the next slide on that. Jim, if you asked me to cross an unfamiliar chasm, a slot canyon out in southern Utah, is it risky? Well, the definition of risk says we have to be able to assign a probability of a negative event. And we don't know. We just said it was unfamiliar. So all we can say is we are uncertain. And so that's where we're going to go at this. Now, what if a company focuses on risk too early, as many companies do, assigning probabilities and net present values? Well, they add a lot of stress to their lives, but also they tend to commit. Like, okay, boss, you told me I need to do it. It's my project. I'll do it no matter what, even if it's a dumb idea. And on the other hand, they may avoid opportunities like, oh, don't send me out to that slot canyon. I'm just sure it's dangerous. This is silly. What we really should do is, instead of thinking about risk early on, think about uncertainty. How do we eliminate it cheaply and early? And that's what we want to do with market-facing projects, but also, as we'll try today, with other sorts of high-risk projects.
Great. And so that leads us to the next polling question. Of what percentage of your projects do you lay out all the assumptions at the beginning of the project? None, less than 10% of them, 10 to 30, and so forth. So So somebody answered none.
And I'll just share my experience a little bit, maybe while people are filling that in. I'd say, in my experience, it's a really low number. I'm not sure the exact number. I'd probably guess at 10 to 20%. But even the companies that did a good job of laying out the assumptions, they often lack the tools to really chase those down effectively. And they lack the tools and skills to communicate progress effectively to management. So I think an absolute first step is getting the assumptions, but then managing that in an efficient, effective way and communicating. Those are also missing, even when companies do the first part well, in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my experience. It's generally 1 out of 5, at best 10, 20% of the projects. Even if you have a tool like this, people tend to think it's too much work to plan ahead. And then when we do have the surprises, they then say, oh, well, they'll either say it'll never happen again, or, they'll come up with some excuse on why it wasn't important to plan. And they'll say, well, we can just deal with it. That's what we do. Because I think a lot of leaders actually enjoy the hunt and dealing with those obstacles, because that's what helps them differentiate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're now saying everything's out in the open, I'm not sure how much of it's true, but I think leaders don't view that as value to them, because that they feel that that's part of their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know if you've
agree.
seen that at all.
Yeah, it's called type 1 versus type 2 decision making. Type 1 is the big bet, and hey, I'm getting paid the big bucks, I should make the big bucks. But Jeff Bezos has said we're wiser to do a lot of type 2, small bets, sampling bets. Just check it out. Let's learn as we go. And that's really the approach that we embrace as well.
Yeah, well said. Okay, Dan, you can take over the screen and try.
All righty, I will share my screen, and hopefully it'll look a lot like what you just left us on there. There we go. Yeah, so unlike the last time we were together, where we had a market-facing project, we're going to go through a demo, coincidentally also called Acme, Jim. Who knew?
But big company,
it's a big company.
Are huge.
Yeah, it's still Acme. And this time they're going to do a major IT upgrade. Maybe they've got a enterprise software upgrade they're doing. Big deal. A lot of risk, dangers in it, transformational, but not facing the market. It's not a new product we're going to be delivering to the market. Can we use the same basic methodology is the question. And we believe the answer is yes. We've had a few clients do some of this work and they reported success. We still want to start with the same approach we would use with a market-facing project, which is to begin by generating assumptions. Now, in the market-facing mode, we would call those market dynamics. Is the market big enough? Is it growing? Here, we're going to call them stakeholder dynamics, and we'll give some examples of these in a little bit. We'll still talk about internal capabilities. Do we have what we need to do to get the job done? And then in the market facing, we call it customer outcomes. Well, these customers may be our own colleagues in our own company. They're users, basically. So there's a pretty strong parallel between these three categories in market facing versus other sorts of big projects. So we're going to focus just for a few minutes on the stakeholder dynamics. Imagine one of the market dynamics or stakeholder dynamics was this. It must be true that management will provide sufficient funding for this project. There's a stakeholder. Is that true or not? So we have our team discuss this, and I'll show you how we go about doing that. And the team goes, well, the impact of that, if it's not true, is pretty big. If they don't fund this puppy, we're going to have a big problem. We're going to have a landmine, right? And then the second question is, how certain are we they will provide sufficient funding? And if it's early in the project, we just haven't had these conversations. We're not saying management will not, we just don't know. And so we're going to label that low certainty. So the team, since it rates at high impact, low certainty, this particular assumption goes into the red danger zone. Now, if it's in the red danger zone, that means we need to investigate it. So we'll do some checking, have some conversations with management, get some project estimates, and hopefully get it into the caution zone. and eventually into the green safe zone. Now, if it's way over on the left side, like this is irrelevant or very low impact, then we don't have to have as high of a level of certainty to proceed. But if it's really high impact, we better be really, really certain. So that's the methodology. We're going to focus on the red danger and the yellow caution ones. And what we'll do is we'll have our team members divide and conquer, and we'll go investigate. In a market-facing project, you might have somebody do market research, somebody going in the lab, somebody else doing customer interviews. In another type of project like this, there might be many, many other tasks that need to be done to drive these assumptions from uncertainty to certainty. Now, the reporting is important. We'll tell management the number of these yellow and red assumptions, and hopefully they'll see those going down month by month. And then we'll get down to a small number. Maybe the last few take a major investment or some investment, and we'll ask for decisions from management. But in the early months of a project, typically we're driving out as much uncertainty as cheaply as we can. And then in a market-facing project, you might do something like this. This might be the flow you go through. But what we're going to do at the workshop is essentially the same, whether it's market-facing or not. And that is really 7 steps. First, we brainstorm assumptions that must be true. Then we think about the life of our users or customers. Then the team members individually rate for impact and certainty. And then the team resolves those ratings into an agreed upon rating. Then we check the certainty matrices to make sure it looks good. We develop a checkpoint plan, basically an action plan. And then as the team meets, let's say every 2 weeks, we check where we're at. And periodically, we send a report to management. So we'll take a quick look at those steps to see how this would work with a project like an IT implementation. And we do have a Derisking quick start card. I think, Jim, you've got that available if anybody wants to download it. What I'm going to do now is jump out of this PowerPoint deck, and I'm going to head over to our software. Let me just see where I put that. Hang on 1 second here, and I'll get that pulled up here. But hang on a second. Let me do this and grab it right here. And then I'm going to share my screen. And hang on. This is what I want right here. There we go. All right, sorry about that. A little stumbling around. I'd already set this project up. Acme IT implementation. And Jim, you and I kicked around a few of these assumptions earlier. Now, the market dynamics, we don't have the capability yet of naming this. We will in the software. Can you maybe hit me with some of the assumptions that might be in the stakeholder dynamics area?
I'll start with one that is near and dear to my heart, is that the business wants it. Does the business want it?
The business wants this
IT.
new IT upgrade. Yep, yeah. Very good.
I mean, very often they don't even know that IT is doing it, and and they're happy with what's going on today. So they're going, what is this about? They haven't talked to anybody in the business. That's a very typical assumption.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you, oh, look at that. Wow.
Oh, we got the code now. All right.
Yeah, well, that's when I tried to do a control underline. I guess that wasn't a good idea. So business wants this new IT upgrade. That's an excellent one. I'll hit and notice I always try to finish the sentence. It must be true that. Let me hit the next button. Right. Any other ones that we want to get out there?
Another one that I see here is that the software is not going is universal. It can actually support all the divisions. It's not, dependent on a specific division or area.
Good, love it. That's great. That's another good one. Must be true that. Good. Yeah. One more.
Let's say that, that there's actually money allocated for this change. Like if you're doing an update on your supply chain, your supply chain software, whatever you're using, DDMRP, whatever you're trying to do, you would want to make sure it's funded and there's money allocated. And it's not just that it's money allocated, it's sufficient money, because very often it's just we can buy the software for $1 million, but it may take us another $1 million to do it. And then another assumption is who is going to install the software. So I just add one more. Is that we're going to outsource the installation, or are we going to insource the installation of the software? And that might be more internal capabilities, but I might have moved to your next area.
Well, that's perfectly fine. And this happens all the time when we're in here. We often will make these shifts. We'll say, well, that is going to be a purple internal capabilities. And what we find is we can generally start those with, it is true that we can. So we just simply reword. This is very common. And by the way, if we were doing market facing, we'd have a lot of typical assumptions here. And we'd have a lot of typical ones for this. If this kind of catches on, if you will, outside of the market facing area, we'll come up with lists of these for IT. Jim, you and I have talked about this. We think this could apply to mergers and acquisitions. There could be a number of different types of projects, and we would come up with typical assumptions. But what have you got? You got another one for the internal?
Sure. Well, the proverbial we have enough SMEs to be able to handle this, because the SMEs always have too many things to do. And maybe there's assumption that we don't need SMEs, or that there'll be some assumption around SMEs that, and we all know that there's never enough subject matter experts out there to support this. And then a tie to that one is another assumption I see often is we think we know who the SMEs are that represent the people that are actually going to be affected, but we choose the wrong SMEs. And then the actual users aren't represented, and they would very often, you talk to the frontline people and they'll say, George, he's pretty smart. He's never done any real work for the last 10 years, but he always uses me. But George doesn't have any idea what I do.
Interesting. Those are really good ones. Let's grab some user outcomes as well then.
So
this is Mark. I've got one, and I'm not sure where it fits, and maybe in the market dynamics. But the how do you handle the what is the priority of this project versus other projects? So I guess it must be true that this has a high enough priority to get worked on.
Perfect. Has sufficient priority vis-a-vis other projects in the pipeline. I love it. That's great. Yeah, I would say that would be a stakeholder one, Mark. I think you nailed it. I think we're going to stay with that lovely shade of yellow on that one.
Got another one,
excellent.
Mark? No, I may, but not right now.
Okay.
How about any user outcomes that you can see there?
The other was, that the software is going to be able to be customized to meet the user's needs, the frontline needs, especially IT. Very often we design software for management, but not for the user, the people that are doing the actual work.
Perfect. I love it. That's excellent.
I do have one here.
Good.
Please.
Yeah, it must meet customers' requirements of not adding work to their workday.
Yeah, I love it.
I
love it. That's great.
Is it can match. It kind of relates to it, but it can do everything what the system does today, that upgrade, but it does it even better. It provides greater capabilities and enablement. And maybe it was repeat from before. I'm not sure.
No, that's good. You know, and you know, this is a good point here. This one might be a required one, and then you might run into a situation like this where you actually also make it a desired, and that is perform important or satisfy important needs. Oops, maybe we'll do this in satisfy important needs not currently being addressed by the existing. So in other words, if you remember when we did one on packaging and we were talking to Amazon, we said a required outcome, we couldn't slow down the packing rate with our corrugated boxes.
Yeah.
But a desired one is we can actually speed up the packing rate. And the same thing I think could apply here.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, that's a nice list. That's probably good enough for us to manage. Does that make sense to push on for here now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the first step, brainstorm. Now, we won't actually do this one today, but sometimes we'll create a consumption chain. And you can do this in different ways. But for IT, you might take a typical user and walk through all the steps they have to do from signing on in the morning to publishing their final report. And then you would ask questions, well, what must be true for all those steps to be taking place? Might be, maybe one of the customer outcomes is I have to be able to use a VPN, you know, while I'm traveling and get into the system this way. Maybe, you know, for their login, I got to have SAML or single sign-on. So, you know, a consumption chain puts you in this, in the shoes of the user, and it kind of forces you to think about all the things they must do. So we won't do that today, but it's just simply a way of expanding your list of assumptions.
Yeah, and Dan, just to build on that, I mean, if you have your value stream map steps, you have your core process step maps.
Yeah,
it's a perfect tool to you know, enter into here and make that part of it. It's your Gamba walk. What could go wrong?
Yep, exactly.
Is another way to look at it. So I love that part of this tool.
So once we get this, these can be done in a very random fashion. We don't have to be going yellow, purple, green. But when we get to the individual ratings, what we're going to do is we're going to check the note colors. Did we get these all in the right color? And I think we did. Then when I hit the sort button, it will sort it by yellow, then purple, and then by blue. And what we're going to do here, if you hit the little information, it's going to say that we need to go in the top box and make sure we've really cleaned up the text. So that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. These look pretty good. But what if we'd rambled on? It was too long. Well, that's where we would want to probably shorten the text a little bit, make it crisp, make sure it's clear, and so forth. So that's just a little bit of editing.
So,
and
so
then,
on that,
yeah, please.
Dan, when do we get into? Very often you turn these into min-max statements in order to do this. Do you do that now or do you do that later?
Comes a little bit later on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we'll send the emails out. Now here we put all our team members, but it could be people who are not on the team. It could be professors at a university. It could be anybody really who has some knowledge in this area. Now, what I'm going to do and this is what the email looks like down here. And I'm just going to email it to myself so we can see what it looks like. Okay. Brainstorming complete, send the survey. And you see there, it's sent just to me, but normally you'd send maybe half a dozen or a dozen team members. And then they would come out here. They would click on this and it would open up the actual survey. Then we would go through this and we would rate this. It must be true that business wants it. Well, that sounds kind of important, doesn't it? Maybe even crucial. We hit this next button. How certain are we this is true that they want it? You know, we don't really know. We're going to put that kind of low. And then the software is universal. We'll call that important, maybe. Now, everybody's making their own assessments here. This one, we know enough. We think it is probably the case. So anyway, we would go through all these, making these ratings. Now, I won't do that all right here just for speed. but every individual would do this first on their own. And then when we got back together again, we would do the team ratings. Actually, what happens on this thing, you can see there's a little dot here. This is like a histogram. So you would have, if 5 people said it was crucial, you can see 5 little blue dots here, maybe 3 important, and so forth. Then what we do is, as a team, we try to resolve our ratings. And so we say, what do you guys think? Is it crucial? Yeah, we think it's crucial. That lights up this column here. What do you think? Perhaps? Yeah, perhaps. Now we're in the yellow zone. And of course, we're going to have rich discussions on this. Then we move on and we keep doing the same thing. Now, here's what we found is kind of interesting. We found that you don't just take the consensus. Hey, most people voted for importance, let's make it important. What you do is there's naturally 3 phases. First, I share my knowledge. Second, I share my opinion. Third, I start repeating my opinion. Now, that third phase is not particularly helpful. So after the whole team has had a chance to kind of say what their knowledge is and share their opinion, if they still have not agreed on what the rating should be, we take the most cautious voice on the team. And so if everybody thought it was important, but Jim, you thought it was crucial, you would win, okay? And if everybody thought it was probably, or maybe everybody thought it was confident, but Mark, you thought it was perhaps, you would win. And so what this does is it avoids false greens on this thing, okay? So we would go through here and we'd make these ratings. I'm just going to do kind of a little bit of a random walk here and just click a few different things without paying too much attention to what it's actually saying. And we'll get these, we'll get some in the red, some in the green, some in the yellow, and so forth. Notice it's now purple. We're now in the internal capabilities. And so we're working our way through these things. Now we're in the blue. Now, we only had a handful of these. In my experience, we typically have maybe 50 to 100 of these things are being graded. So it can take a little time, but it's much better to sort this out early on. Oops. Oh yeah, now look, notice this. This rating had already been satisfied. This is a little mind-bending, so let me see if I can do this justice. When you rate the customer outcomes, you're really rating 2 things. One is, do we really know what the customer wants? And are we able to solve what the customer wants? So when we went through the required outcomes, we were rating what's the impact? Now we're rating can we provide a solution? Not how confident are we understand what the customer wants. So when you get to these, you don't have to do the impact anymore. That takes a little time to kind of get, grasp that whole thing. But that's basically what we find when we get this one, another red one here. Now I hit the done button.
Okay, just
please,
back
Mark.
up a minute there. So on the impact, where does that come from if you're not putting it in?
Yes. Well, here's what happened. When we were in required outcomes, this cannot add work to their workday. We rated the impact and we rated the probability. And this question stays the same, but this question was, how sure are we customers would rate this? This is RO1, okay? And that's under required outcomes. Now let's go over here under required solutions. It's the same one. It will not add work to the workday. And so the same impact we did on the outcome is still valid. How important would customers rate it? But now, instead of talking about how sure are we customers would agree or would want this, we're asking how sure are we can provide a solution. So it's kind of mind-bending, but basically we are asking how sure are we customers want this, and what's the impact of it, and how sure are we customers want this. And then over here, we're asking what's the impact, which we already really said over here, and how sure are we can provide a solution. Same thing with desired. This isn't something they're getting today, but what's the impact of satisfying this, and how sure are we this is what they want? Over here, what's the impact of supply satisfying this? Oh, I'm sorry, this one here. And what's our confidence we can provide a solution? Does that make sense, Mark?
Yes, and does that only happen for the blue
Blue.
ones?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why it's kind of weird. We got three colors: yellow stayed yellow, purple stayed purple, and blue blew up on us. Why did it blow up on us? Well, first of all, because we divided into required and desired. And I didn't elaborate on this, but some things customers are already getting and want to keep getting. So we put those under required. Some things customers would like to get, we want to give them something they're not getting. In our packaging example, they can't suppress the packing rate at Amazon. They got to keep it where it's at, but they'd like to pack even faster. That's how we split between required and desired. Then over here, it's can we solve it so they don't lose their packing rate? And over here, can we provide a solution that lets them pack even faster?
But it seemed to me the first one was we had an assumption about how important they thought it was. And then there's a question about basically how sure are we know they're.
Yeah, good for you. This is a little bit mind bending. So when we get into these, let me move on here. In fact, I'll tell you what, well, let's do it here. Yeah, let me back up a second here. When we're in the purple and the yellow, we are asking, how important something is, what's the impact? And then we're asking really two questions. We're asking, how certain are you that this is true, that we can properly identify and select proper SMEs? And we're asking, how certain are we that we correctly put the right impact rating in? Now, what if somebody goes, well, I'm really certain of this part, and I'm really not certain of that part? What do? We take the lowest certainty. We take the lowest one here. We find in practice, Mark, that most people are answering this question, how certain are we can properly identify? But in some cases, it's even less likely. They don't have any idea. They were kind of guessing at this impact rating. Mm-hmm. So that's how both those, very sharp eye on your part that you picked up on that, but that's how we work through this.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. And then when we get through those ratings, this is why the first time through, it's probably a good idea to have a facilitator, but it goes pretty smoothly, once you get the hang of it. Then we check these and we just make sure they're in the right spot. We just want to make sure, especially, that we don't put something in the green that should have been in the yellow or red, because once it's in the green, we don't spend a lot more time with it. What we do now is we create a checkpoint plan, and business wants this new upgrade. Now we're going to come up with some tasks. Maybe we need to poll business leaders to determine their desire for a new system. And maybe we'll give that one to Dan and make it due tomorrow. So that would be, we would add in tasks here. We might have another task that we might have to pursue. And so we'll put these tasks in here, and there might be multiple tasks needed to resolve one assumption, okay? And then when we move along here, we'll have a collection of all the assumptions that have been created. Sometimes we can borrow one of these that was previously done and use it again. So this software lets you resolve what is kind of a tricky problem. We call it the one-to-many and the many-to-one. In other words, you might have, let's imagine a market-facing project. You might have one task, interviewing an industry expert, that resolves three assumptions. Now we know how fast the market's growing, we know how big it is, and we know the dynamics. That's the one-to-many. You also might have the many-to-one. You might have one assumption. We can scale up our product to full production, and it requires three tasks. Do this in glassware, do it in a pilot plant, do it in full production. So this system we have here lets you do the one-to-many and the many-to-one. You then update your checkpoint task. let's say Dan did another task here. Let's say I did this one. I mouse over this, and yeah, actually, management does. I got some really good poll numbers here. So there's my source of truth. And the finding was 99% of biz leaders are desperate for a new IT system. Woo-woo. And then the team and I talk about this. Say, what do you guys? Does that move us to probably? No, we think that moves us all the way up to confident. Great. So we do that as a team. Now we come back here and we don't have any more green assumptions. I have to click the green filter on to see it. Then what we do, let me do this now to wrap this up. If I get out of here, let's go to a project that's been completed. And we do the updating here. Then as you get farther in the project, I can play this little timeline here, and you can see that the column chart is counting the number of caution and danger assumptions. And we're going to be driving those down. And in the upper right, we're going to be driving the assumptions toward the origin. And then we can look over all of this, see these various certainty matrices. This one's near the end. That's why it's almost all green. And then we can prepare a 2-page management report, a PDF, and we can also create a PowerPoint. And this is really helpful for making management presentations. Basically, we give them an overview, tell them what our our assumptions are, uncertainties, how we're progressing, how we're moving in toward the origin. If there's any possible or probable landmines, we talk about those, and we make a recommendation.
So is there a way to download the actions that we took?
Yeah, there is.
Those?
Yeah, there is. There's the ability to, hang on one second. You can, hang on one second. I'm trying to remember where it is. You can send out an Excel spreadsheet. Hang on, maybe it's here. Oh yeah, here we go. Here you go. Yeah, you can export all of these. You can do it by assumption or by task. So if somebody doesn't have the software, you can export this and it tells everybody what they need to do. That's doable also. Yep. And there's a lot of other PowerPoint slides you can create and so forth on this thing to, tell your story. Speaking of the story, let me just mention a couple last things to close this out. That 2-page de-risking report tends to be really helpful. Some of our teams, client teams, they may have a meeting every quarter to go over their results in a presentation, but maybe every month they just simply send an update to management. And what we want to do is change the dynamics here. Instead of confusing everybody with this in-depth thing that nobody can follow, let's use the same format that everybody in the leadership team is used to. And let's be able to describe each assumption in detail and talk about any they want to. And I need to go in and saying, hey, boss, I don't know, if this needs to continue. If there's a serious landmine, we'll have a conversation and let you know as soon as possible. Maybe we need to do something different than what we thought. That's certainly true for market-facing innovation. And we need to tell the boss when we're asking for a decision, like investment, and when we're simply updating them, which is usually early on. And then it's kind of like a Gantt chart signals to management that you're organized. You can tell them the tasks, the timelines, the resources. This is kind of like a Gantt chart, but this way it shows them you're managing risk well. And we find when you do this, it's a lot more fun to work with management. So that's kind of the overview there, Jim. I'll turn this over to you.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Yeah.
Bring us back in to the last survey question, which is, now that you see all the power of this tool and how it can be used, if you can go into Poll EV and rank where you think this could best apply at your company. So, Dan, what have you been seeing recently in your experience?
Well, it's been 95% new, maybe 98% new product introduction, because this is what we do at the AIM Institute, market-facing innovation. And so really, it's only been just 2 or 3 very clever clients of ours who said, hey, I think this could apply in other projects like IT or like M&A. I'm going to start up a very first time, I'm going to do this with a client in mergers and acquisitions. So we think that, our main home will be in new product introduction, but we are really interested in exploring this in other areas. And so we're on a bit of a learning path. We don't know why it wouldn't work at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it would work even any large scale project where you have multiple groups of people getting together, trying to come to a single point solution.
Yeah.
I think it works really well. Mark, you're going to say something?
Just that, this is where we get into this developing certainty versus mitigating known risk. I see the more known risk in the new product introduction because you're beyond a lot of the invention at that point. So I rated actually research and development above that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
I think
R&D
it makes a great point, is the unknown unknowns, but it depends on how you define where MPI starts. Some people include R&D in it, some people don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, but
Well,
I think those
for me,
unknown
it's a
unknowns,
split.
it really helps.
For me, it's the split between developing the function versus implementing the project or implementing the product itself. So NPI to me is more the implement the product now that I've got all my inventions out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark's making a good point.
Sure.
A lot of our clients come to us. We think of technology development, which is science facing and turns money into knowledge. And then that moves into product development, which is market facing and turns the knowledge back into money. And to Mark's point, a lot of our clients, they have a technology development project and they say, now, was this going to fly? And we say, well, pick a market segment. And because this is very market segment specific, and we'll try it out. But if it doesn't work there, it doesn't mean your technology is bad. You may need to look at another market. So yeah, I would agree that many people come to us when they're in that technology development area and they want to see, is this dog going to hunt? Good.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks, Dan, for enlightening us on the de-risking journey. And it doesn't have to be an unknown unknown. We can turn that into, some increased certainty.
Yep.
with a little bit of investigation. And if we do it in a concerted efforts, and I think the other point that this does is very often as we go through a project, different things surface throughout the project, and the once and done risk approach that I sometimes see folks take is they'll do it at the beginning of the project and then they won't even look at it again. And, they said, we got to execute now, but there's still risk coming up, but they're not looking at those risks any longer because they think they have it all addressed, and then they become ignored and then they balloon. So I love this, that it just keeps on going at it, at identifying it, and not looking at risk as something to be avoided, but something as an opportunity to get better. So any other thoughts on that before I close out?
I think that's it for me, Jim. Good speaking with you, and Mark, you as well.
Yeah, so just as a closeout, we have some webinars coming up. I think we're working on a webinar maybe next month in simulation realization and NPI. We have a webinar tomorrow on artificial intelligence. That's a fireside chat on practical AI. AI is the greatest buzzword of the last couple of years. So how can you practically do it? We'll talk about that. We have a very good panel on that. And then we'll be getting into digital twins again in early October, and a demo of a client that we've actually been tracking them as we've been implementing the digital twin. So we'll share some best practices and the results of that. And then we'll, of course, be back here with Dan in early November for new product introduction blueprinting. And I think we'll be addressing other areas just like hyperautomation and the supply chain risk and resiliency upcoming. So again, our foundation is people, process, data, and technology. That's how we're aligned with our 50+ consultants and consulting companies. And this is our group of folks you can find on Consulting EIG website. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and Dan for giving those insights into this very important area.